Well, we are back here on Upper Left Sports. The Zags are in the thick of WCC play. Picked up a couple key conference wins versus BYU, San Francisco at home. Boys really do look good coming off of the COVID pause. I mean,
absolutely.
Really clean basketball we're seeing. But this morning, we're not going to talk about the Zags on the court right now as much as a recruiting update. Looking ahead a little bit, and the Zags did have a week off between San Francisco and LMU. That'll be tomorrow night, 8 p.m. at the Kennel. Mark Few did hit the road onto the recruiting trail. Instead of them, a lot of people, I think, expected the Zags to schedule a non-conference game. They didn't. They actually prioritized getting out on the recruiting trail. So we're going to talk about that. But I don't think you can talk about recruiting without really diving into who do we expect to stay, who do we expect to go on this Gonzaga roster. So I want to start there before we start talking about some of these priority recruits. And I want to get your opinion on this. I think we know a couple names who are going to be gone, right? Andrew Nembhard's a senior. He's going to move on because of eligibility. Chet Holmgren is going to be a top 3 player in the draft next year. He's gone. Chet's not coming back.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then Rasir Bolton. We know that those 3 are going to move on. Bolton's a senior as well. I think where the conversation starts is, do we expect to see Drew Timme back in a Gonzaga uniform next season?
Yeah, that's that's the question that we're all asking. Obviously, going into this season, that was even a question of whether he would be back or not. Obviously, he went and kind of got some of that draft feedback. And, I think this year, Drew Timme is a really interesting case because this year he's continued to polish what he's already been very good at, what makes him one of the best college players in the country, and again, a National Player of the Year candidate out there on the court. Really wanted to see him kind of add some more to his game if he was going to go. But again, you think about the NIL that's came out, and Drew Timme has taken advantage of that. He's picked up a lot of sponsorships here in the Spokane area. And that kind of brings question for Drew Timme. Is he going to get that feedback he needs to go in the first round of the draft? If he doesn't get that feedback, he seems to enjoy the college life, has those NIL sponsorships. It could keep him around for one more year as well.
It's funny because this was a preseason player of the year, came runner-up last season. A couple years ago, I think his NBA draft stock was actually higher. And now, as he's an amazing college player, right? And I think that as scouts have gotten a chance to see his game develop more, he's kind of settled into that mid to late second rounder is what a lot of people project. And so I think for Drew Timme, he's going to have a decision to make. Is he ready to turn pro, or does he want to spend one more year in college? I think he does enjoy the college experience. If he stays for a senior season at Gonzaga, he'll have a chance to go down as one of the greatest, Zags, but possibly college basketball players of all time, just in terms of a career, right? You see a lot of guys leave after a couple of years. And so I'm going to say right now that I'm going to expect Drew Timme to return. We won't know, obviously, for quite some time. I do think, how this team finishes the season, whether they cut down the nets in April or have an early exit, whatever it looks like in the tournament's going to play a big factor into that. Other guys, as you see Andrew Nembhard leave, I think Nolan Hickman steps in right away, fills those shoes at the guard position. I know a lot of Zag fans have been wanting Hickman's minutes to go up. This is a kid who we all know. I mean, you can see it very clearly. Ton of potential, has the ability to run this team. I'm not sure from an NBA level that scouts are going to catch on as quick because he's not super long. He's not super tall. His athleticism doesn't jump off the page like with maybe Jalen Suggs.
Sure.
I think that as he has an opportunity to really be the guy and run this offense, that scouts are going to catch up as well. But you kind of go through, and this is why we're getting into this, is like, where do the Zags have needs? And so you lose Andrew Nembhard, but you've got Nolan Hickman filling in for him. You lose Rasir Bolton, but you got a guy in Dom Harris who has still not been cleared to play due to his, foot issue, his injury that he had earlier in the season. That, you talk about if you brought in a freshman like Dom Harris or a transfer like Dom Harris, he'd be one of the most highly coveted recruits or transfers. So you just look at this guard situation that the Zags are setting up for next year between Hickman and Harris, and I'm not sure there's a huge need to go grab an incoming freshman.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation. I mean, just with looking at the gaps, like you said, there's just not a whole lot for this incoming class in terms of those needs there. So that's really where this recruiting trail gets interesting, just to see how the Zags are going to continue to reload. It's going to be a little bit different, I think, when you look at the 2022 class compared to the two previous classes that came in, which were obviously just massive classes with Julian Strother, Chet, Jalen Suggs, Dominic Harris, Hunter Salas. I mean, all these guys, Nolan Caden as well. So it's going to be a little bit interesting for Zag fans to see just that change in recruiting for this year, but Zags aren't stopping. They've got plenty of recruits they're going after.
I think it's a really good point you just made, is Zag fans may have gotten very used to these top recruiting classes, and I think they're going to be a little disappointed at the surface when they see, like, they've got Braden Huff coming in. We'll talk about him in a moment, but he's the only guy who signed. Doesn't mean we won't get a late signee, kind of like Hickman came in. But I think, cool the Jets a little bit in terms of that panic. It's mainly that they've got some guys sitting on the bench ready to contribute. They kind of have a freshman class sitting there already. Other guys we do expect to come back would be Hunter Salas. I mean, his role will only expand next year. We've seen, how good Hunter can be. I think a very interesting name to watch is Julian Strother. I think that most people would say, and I expect Julian Strother to return. The thing I want to caution our viewers about with Julian Strother is that this is a kid that the way that he's built, his athleticism, his length, just perfectly fits what NBA scouts are looking for. I'd be shocked with the way that the draft process works now that he doesn't at least put his name in, get some feedback.
Sure.
And just don't be shocked if this is the type of kid that could get some feedback from some team saying, hey, if you're sitting there at 15 or 20, like, we're going to take you because they see that upside. Now, scouts can tell you whatever they want to tell you. Unfortunately, they're not the ones making the pick, like we've seen with some Zags that have decided to leave early. So I do expect him to come back. If he doesn't return, though, that's where I see a glaring hole on this team, is a lack of a true three. And I think both of us do expect if Julian moves on, or even if he stays, I think this would be an area that the Zags do decide to address, via the transfer portal.
Yeah, that seems to be the most likely at this point. And, like you said, Julian could definitely get that feedback. The NBA, if you don't follow the NBA as much, they draft largely based on potential. Yeah. We've seen a lot of high-producing college players that just don't go very high. I mean, you look at Luka Garza for one last year. He was obviously one of the best college players in recent memory, really. And, he was not a high draft pick. So they really are focused on potential. When you've got that 6'7" size, you've got length, athleticism, and you can be a knockdown shooter, that is a lot of potential. So definitely be wary of that. But we've seen the Zags, make a lot of big splashes in the transfer market. So if that comes up, I wouldn't be extremely concerned. I do think the Zags would obviously have a lot of kind of ammunition for incoming transfers to just say, hey, we have a role for you ready. So there could be some late movement, like you're saying. That's definitely a possibility.
Other names we look to come back for the Zags: Ben Gregg, enrolled early last season. Has played, sparse minutes this year. I think a lot of Zag fans see that potential for Ben Gregg to be a very solid, 4-year guy for this Gonzaga Bulldog program. Caden Perry, he has suffered, numerous back injuries. I think the Zags rushed him back a little the first time, are now taking it a little easy, as they don't necessarily need him during WCC play. He's a kid, the athleticism jumps off the page. I think we all know that when his day comes to be the guy on the low block for the Zags, I think he will be ready. And then, you're going to have Anton Watson back next year as a senior. This is a kid that he very likely could go back to starting next year, right? Anton's been very solid as of late. Had a double-double the other night at the Kennel. But you talk about, if Drew comes back and all the kids, all the guys we just mentioned decide to come back, that's 7 guys. We know that Mark Few does not like to run a super deep rotation. You got Braden Huff coming into the fold. That's 8. And so I do think that, the Zags are going to add a couple transfers. They just really have as of recent. I mean, the whole getting these high recruits has been a new thing for this Zags program. They really have been transfer you for quite some time. So do expect them to be very high. I mean, the thing with the transfer portal now is in just players being able to move is coaches really, I mean, when a coach comes in and says, hey, we're going to feature you, or we think you have a chance to come in and start, that means a lot. And I think that with this last group of transfers. The Zags couldn't really promise a lot of that just because of how much they were returning. And so I do see the Zags most likely being very in on some high names. Let's talk about Braden Huff. So that's the one kid who is committed in the 2022 class. I think that this is the type of player who's really gone under the radar. Comes out of Illinois. His school is not necessarily known as a powerhouse in Illinois basketball. Just a 3-star recruit. I think he's ranked 100 and something in the country. But I think he's going to sneak up on a lot of people. We've seen his game improve. His team is now ranked in the top 25 nationally. Gets a chance to go against Bronny James and that Sierra Canyon team in early February on ESPN Plus, I think it is. But tell me and tell our viewers out there what the Zags are getting in Braden Huff and really what we can expect early in his Gonzaga career.
Yeah, this is he's a 6'9" power forward who a very skilled player is I think the best way to put it. You watch him play out there. He's got good footwork in the post. He is a very capable passer out of the post as well, which we know Gonzaga loves that out of their bigs, being able to facilitate out to the guards. And he's just a very poised player out on the court. We've even seen a little bit watching his games. His team will actually let him bring the ball up a little bit too, so capable ball handler for his size.
Not like a Chet Holmgren.
No.
Spoiled there.
To be fair, I don't think when we ever reference a big handling the ball,
let's not get used to that.
Do not equate to Chet. Chet is a one-of-a-kind player.
Almost like a unicorn.
Some have said that. But very capable big. And I think that's just going to be a player that can come in and play some spot minutes his freshman year if needed, and not going to be a guy that you necessarily have to worry about being out there. And then as he progresses through his Gonzaga career, definitely a guy who could, battle for a starting spot and turn out to be a very, very solid player for the Zags.
It's just a name that I don't think most Zag fans even know. I think we were so caught up in the Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren, these big names coming in, the tricky trio, all that kind of stuff. And Braden Huff, I think, is going to sneak up on a lot of people. They'll get him into the gym. They'll get him into that program. I think he's going to pop pretty early for this Zags team. Now let's talk about, like we said in the beginning of the video, Mark Few decided to hit the road, go watch 3 priority recruits this last week, got into some gyms, watched some guys. I want to talk about, to begin as we get into this 2023 class and some of the names the Zags are really diving into, I want to talk about a duo of guys, and what we're hearing a lot of is that they really want to pair these two guys together. That's Dusty Stromer and Jared McCain. These guys played this year. They played in November. McCain's team did come out on top. I'll tell you what, let's start with Dusty Stromer because I love this kid's game. I think he screams Gonzaga Bulldog. My favorite thing I told you off air that I learned about him is, so he's a junior in high school now, plays in Thousand Oaks, California. It's just right outside of LA. It's just a neighborhood in Los Angeles. And his sophomore campaign, his season was canceled because of COVID. So he decided, like probably a lot of kids, to train and work on his game. That's great. It's pretty normal. But here's what's crazy about the Dusty Stromer story is that he lives at home with he's got his parents, and his 86-year-old grandmother lives upstairs. And because he was going out and going to the gym and training, and they didn't want to bring COVID home and infect her, he stayed in a tent for a year in their front yard training to up his game. And every scout you talk to, even if you just watch the film, his game progressed quicker than a lot of kids you see go from a sophomore to a junior. He put the work in.
Huge jump.
Tell me about Dusty Stromer's game and why the Zags are so in on this junior out of California.
Dusty Stromer, like you said, man, he just screams the Zags with his play style. He's a 6'6" guard, ranked number 37 in the country per 24/7 Sports. He's a knockdown shooter. When you look at his game, whether it's off the dribble or a catch and shoot, he's a very fluid shooter. But that's not his only part of his game. He's good attacking the rim as well.
Got some bounce.
He's got some bounce.
Sneaky
he can
bounce.
Finish above the rim for sure. But what I really love is he's also got that touch in the mid-range, and that makes a guy like him so hard to guard when you have to close out aggressively on the perimeter, and then you've got a guy who can beat your closeout and either hit you with the elbow pull-up or just get up and finish above the rim. That's a very hard skill set to play against. So, this is a guy, he was up here, actually got a visit during the Texas game as well. So
unofficial visit.
Unofficial visit. He's taken a few unofficial visits. That was one of them. It's just, if they can get this pairing, I mean, he will be a great player for the Zags. I would envision him really probably starting or pushing for a starting spot as a freshman, because he's just that level of player, and he's got that poise out there as well. He doesn't get rattled on the court. It's exactly what you love to see out of a young player, and he's still got another year to progress. So we really, the Zags are getting in on him early, and it's going to be very interesting to see if he continues this level of progression. He's going to be a high-level freshman.
The only official visit he took was to Louisville, but there is a lot going on there with Chris Mack and that Louisville program, and so I would expect that relationship to kind of,
cool off a little bit.
I think really for me, you've kind of now got Gonzaga North and Gonzaga South with Arizona and Tommy Lloyd down there. I know Tommy was very early on his game, and then this is a kid that grew up, in the shadows of UCLA, and so I do think UCLA will very much. They've made an offer, Mick Cronin. I think that's really the main competition for the Zags as we're talking about Dusty Stromer. Let's talk about Jared McCain. What we're hearing a lot is just that the Zags would love to pair these two together. And you can see it. When you watch their games, you can see how well they would play together. I mean, when I watch Jared McCain, I see a facilitator. He's a 6'2" guard. I kind of see, honestly, a little bit of Stephen Gray in his game. He's a pure shooter, good dribbler. He's not necessarily, Jalen Suggs was just like a freak athlete. We got used to these guards for Gonzaga. He has a lot more Andrew Nembhard to his game than Jalen Suggs. But tell me about Jared McCain. Tell me why the Zags are so big on him, and tell me why this really is that dream pairing for Mark Few, Brian Michelson, and this Gonzaga coaching staff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Jared McCain, man, he's a very fun player to watch, to say the least. He's ranked number 23 in the country per 24/7 Sports. He's been on varsity since his freshman season. His coach actually kind of moved the roster around a little bit, played him over some upperclassmen because his coach has said he was that ready early on. And one of the things when you look into Jared McCain, you learn more about him. The thing that pops up most is his maturity and his poise out there on the court. His coach even mentioned that playing on varsity, especially as a freshman, is typically much more of a mental thing than it is a physical thing. You have to be ready for that level of play. He actually kind of blew onto the scene during last summer's Nike EYBL tournament. He had 20.5 points a game, just over 4 assists and 4 rebounds a game. Shot 50% from the field, 41% from 3. And I tell you what, man, you watch this guy's game. He is a very capable ball handler, a good facilitator. But really what pops out to me is he's just a sniper out there on the court. I almost look at him as kind of a blend of Andrew Nembhard and Kevin Pangos. That's really kind of what it reminds me.
Sure.
Just because he's that fluid of a shooter. You look at his stroke mechanically, I mean, it is a beautiful jump shot. So it's going to translate to the next level without a doubt. And if you can pair these two players, it's going to be one of the better back perimeter shooting backcourts that the Zags have had in the last couple of years. We've seen the Zags really be that, most proficient 2-point team in the country for 2 years now. So getting these two brings a lot more shooting, and that's really going to open up for the bigs that Gonzaga gets and make them just that much harder to guard.
The other player that Mark Few went out and saw on the recruiting trail this last week was Mookie Cook. He's the 4th-ranked recruit in the country per 24/7 Sports. He's got 22 offers, 6'7" wing. He's out of Jefferson, Oregon, but he's playing at Compass Prep down in Chandler, Arizona. I'll tell you what, though, this is a very electric score. The way he's able to get to the rim reminds you a little bit when you're watching like the Hunter Salas highlights coming out of high school. And same thing, we talked in the beginning of this video about why the Zags may not be super involved in the 22 class, and you start to think about where this team's going to progress and where guys may, come and go as in this program, and you look at a player like that. The Zags time and time again the last 5 years have prioritized this type of slasher, athletic, just Energizer Bunny. He can shoot a little bit, but he can get to the rim at ease, and you can tell that Mark Few and this coaching staff really prioritize having that type of player on the roster. If I'm not out there watching Mookie Cook highlights, tell me what kind of game he has and why Mark Few loves him.
Yeah, I think what you said was electric, and it's a great explanation of him. I mean, this is a guy who can shoot the three. He can bring the ball up the court with ease at 6'7", but his ability to get to the rim and get above the rim is really just one of the best we see in the high school class of 2023. So very aggressive player, and I think for the Zags, while we talked about Strother's likely to come back for next season, going into that following season where the 2023 class would come in, very, very good chance that Julian Strother is moving on at that point, which is going to open up a starting role at that three. And that's when you're looking at these high-level recruits, top 5 recruit in the country, you really have to have that ability more than likely to start them. Chet coming off the bench for some of the games this season, a lot of the games, that is really, you're not going to get that a lot out of high-level recruits. And so the Zags obviously kind of learned that early, and Chet's really a starter, playing starter minutes, Anton Watson coming off the bench for him. But you have to have that starting role, and Mookie's going to fill that. And he's really going to just bring a slashing from the wing that we haven't seen really in quite a while. We had Corey Kispert for 4 years. You've got Julian Strother, who's capable. Mookie's that next level when it comes to getting to the rim.
The last name that gets tossed around a lot right now in Zagland is Anthony Black, a 2022 recruit. Zags were heavily involved in his recruiting, have cooled off quite a bit. I think the Zags are going to make his final list, whatever that means. We've just seen the coaching staff back off quite a bit. I'm not sure they really believe they have a real chance at Anthony Black. Just made the McDonald's All-American team, so I know the Zags are trying to keep that alive, the trail of getting these McDonald's All-Americans to GU. But sure, let us know down in the comments, who do you think is going to, stay? Who do you expect to go and test the NBA draft waters? I'll tell you one thing. We can look ahead, and it's fun to look ahead with this Gonzaga program, but we really do need to enjoy what we got going right now. This team is really starting to click. We knew that it was going to take a while for, a lot of these young guys to really find their own rhythm, and we are seeing that in WCC play. Zags take on LMU tomorrow night at the Kennel, and we'll continue to look forward to really winning that WCC regular season title, hopefully winning the title down in Vegas, and moving on to the NCAA tournament come March.